So, let's start with a bang, a literal bang. The explosion that was and is Afghanistan. Who could have predicted that a place so marginal in a way could be so central all of a sudden? And after years of being known mostly for a kind of faceless society engaged in an endless war, we now have before us a great deal more detail. Arthur Kent had a hunch about all of this because he started covering Afghanistan as far back as 1980. And he's been both reporting to various news media and documenting the situation there as a documentary filmmaker. In the early days, we thought it was a Soviet story. Today, we think it's a clash of civilizations story. And on, it's a human tragedy, both on the macro level and on a micro level. So our first two speakers, Arthur Kent and Nullifer Zira, will address this issue. Arthur, if you could come up now.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Moses. Nice room. Nice presence. And it's wonderful to see the program begin with a kilt and the skirl of the pipes. I thought for a moment we were going to see the famous Neimer tartan. And the even more legendary Neimer knees. Oh, I got to tell you, my heart sank when I saw these cowboys when I walked in. You know, because we all remember playing with these when we were kids, and then learned just how much more lethal they really are in the real world. But anyway, let's see, you want me to go first, right, Moses? Okay. Well, let's do something different. Let's at least start somewhere cheerful. Come with me to the Caribbean. Picture yourself in the Caribbean, pulling on a cold, wet rubber suit. Grab that regulator in your mask, get your fins straight, roll over the back of the boat. You've got your scuba tank on. And you've strapped lead weights to your waist, and now we're going down, 100 feet. Under the waves. And your tank is bubbling happily. Your fins carrying you through a wonderful undersea garden. Life is sweet. Up there on the surface, your wife, husband, concubine is sunbathing on the deck of your brand new 80-foot yacht. Your stockbroker, he's got you out of the market, safely into real estate. The dot-com collapse was somebody else's problem. Then, the unthinkable. Your gauges tell you that your tank is down to 300 pounds per square inch. Well, it can't be. That's not fair. That's not part of the plan. You just finished the descent. You should have enough air for 10 minutes at this depth, for another 15 minutes to make a safe ascent. 300 psi. You're diving on empty at 100 feet. So, what do? Do you panic? Some divers do. They swim for that silvery bright surface as fast as they can. They forget all their basic training, and they hold their breath. As they rise, the sea's pressure decreases, the air in their lungs expands, and things get ugly. Air forces its way through the alveoli, through the walls of the lungs and into the bloodstream, into the heart, and up the carotid arteries to the brain. On deck, if you get that far, you wonder why your partner's looking at you with such horror. It's because of the vacant expression on your face, the blood frothing at your mouth, your hand tearing at the skin around your neck, You can hear the air bubbles crackling in there. But it's the embolism deep in your brain that kills you. And all because you panicked. Divers are trained to recognize panic and to overcome it. First of all, stop what you're doing. Breathe. You've got 300 psi there. Take a breath. Then think. Then act. Stop. Breathe. Think. Then act. That expanding air can be your friend. Even if you can't get your dive buddy's attention and share his or her air up to the surface, 300 psi, if it's handled properly, can get you 100 feet up to the surface at a safe ascent rate, less than 60 feet per minute. If you go up slowly and exhale gently as the air expands. If you keep your head. If you think before you act. So, what happens if the stakes are infinitely higher? What happens if entire nations are on the line? What happens if all our futures are in question, not just one diver? And that's really the kind of crisis that September 11 was, and is. So how did the people who took charge after the suicide attacks behave? People like George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, George Tenet. After all, if the White House, the Pentagon, and the CIA are just creatures of reflex, there'll be more than an air embolism to pay. There'll be more suicide attacks. More people at home and abroad are going to die, and the guilty are going to go free. So did the president and his men have the humility to recognize the true nature of the crisis? That they were up against forces, and are up against forces like the ocean that you can't completely understand. That their own mistakes, not just cruel fortune, could have contributed to the crisis. Or did they panic and just fall back on all the wrong reflexes? Well, you be the judge, because whether you're Canadian or American or British or Afghan, the Bush administration claims to be on the warpath in all our best interests. Case in point, Afghanistan. So let's go take a look via videotape at one Afghan city, Ghazni. The scenes you're about to see were photographed December 30th. That's about 6 weeks after the collapse of the Taliban regime. Let's go to the tape, guys.
Ghazni, just a few hours' drive southwest of Kabul. 1,000 years ago, the Ghaznavid dynasty boasted 400 poets and 900 scholars. But it's the legacy of the last 3 decades that haunts the city now. The Grand Fortress was left deserted by Taliban forces fleeing American bombing last autumn. A ragtag civilian militia has moved in.
My name is Muhammad Omar. I was an English teacher in the Ghazni city schools before Taliban. When the Taliban came to Ghazni city, they said to me, the school is stopped. They said to me, I don't like teachers.
Omar and his friends bear arms for the pre-Taliban warlord who is trying to regain power here. But the local shura, or council, is badly divided. One of the 3 main camps is made up of former Taliban supporters. And more than 1,000 Taliban gunmen and 500 al-Qaeda militants are still in the area, dispersed to mountain hideouts within 20 kilometers of the city.
You will go and attack Al-Qaeda?
No. I am afraid from Al-Qaeda now.
Why?
Because they have many personnel, they have many guns. We don't have personnel now. when the American personnel to help me, we go to the mountains.
But aside from scouting parties, U.S. war planners have bypassed Ghazni. In this vacuum, almost every neighborhood has a new, homegrown warlord. Meantime, overhead, the signature of Afghanistan's latest foreign intruder. The mixed results of U.S. bombing are visible in the wards of Ghazni's hospital. Ali and Sultan Khail are survivors of a bungled B-52 strike. Their mother and 13 other villagers were killed. The boy's uncle, Faisal, says a truck carrying 4 Arab fighters had driven through the village not long before the bomber appeared. But the Arabs were an hour down the road when the bombs fell. When Ali and Sultan grow up, will they believe that their mother's death was a tragic mistake in a good cause? Or will Osama's heirs be writing the history books in this part of the world? The head nurse here, a holdover from Taliban times, sounds anti-American.
No, there weren't any Taliban or Arab in that place.
What he doesn't say is that he is treating a senior Talib wounded in another attack. We're taken to him by a doctor who supports the new interim government. Halil Rahman is the nephew of the former head of the Taliban's secret police, Qari Ahmadullah. He was wounded in this attack in neighboring Paktia province. The remains of ammunition and the bodies of young men of fighting age, filmed by an AP television team, appear to support U.S. claims that this was a legitimate target. So does the presence of CIA forward air controllers. In Ghazni, will the nephew and his Talib bodyguards be arrested? No, says one local commander, the move would provoke a Taliban attack, which no one faction is strong enough yet to repulse. So Ghazni lives in limbo.
The peoples in Gaza City wanted the international community to help them. I want to the President Bush to take me a passport when I go to the American.
So just 2 quick points there. Omar and his passport. You know, this is a great advantage that we in the West have in combating terrorism. Most people in the Muslim and third worlds naturally lean in our direction if they get a chance to share just a scrap of the opportunities that we enjoy here. The second thing, isn't death a divide? There is no international agency keeping track of the number of people like Ali and Sultan's mother and those 13 other villagers who have died in the U.S. bombing campaign. Our best guess, between 2,500 and 4,000 Afghan children, women and men. Now, we keep accurate count, as we should properly, of every body part, every person killed or missing at the World Trade Center site, but not in Afghanistan. Osama loves that inconsistency. Oh, the hypocritical, callous, greedy West, they cackle out through their megaphones in the madrasas. You feel like giving Osama a gift? I don't. That's what we're doing. Now, Ghazni. So that was Ghazni. That was about 6 months ago. Nothing's changed. New governor doesn't have any armed forces. Roads are still unpatrolled and insecure. Taliban and al-Qaeda gunmen still in the area. The Red Cross has still not sent its foreign nationals back into the Ghazni hospital. Did you see any women in that tape? You know, the women of Ghazni are so fearful of backsliding by that male-only shura that they still live in the regimen set for them by the Taliban. 7 months after the Taliban's collapse. So we could ask ourselves, how hard did the West really try to secure Afghanistan? Well, consider this. You add up the 5,000 soldiers with the International Security Force in Kabul, 5,000 Canadian, British, Australian combat troops of other nationalities, 5,000 American combat soldiers. That's about 15,000 Western troops on the ground in Afghanistan. Today, NATO in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, in Macedonia, in Kosovo, has 57,000 troops on the ground today, keeping order. That's almost 4 times as many troops in an area 1/8 the size of Afghanistan. Is that the mathematics of success? You've heard the excuses, the explanation. The White House says, well, the United States doesn't want to get bogged down in Afghanistan. Bogged down. It's a byword, it's a mantra, and it's a lie. The United States has been bogged down in Afghanistan since the early 80s, when the CIA ran its largest ever covert support operation to the Afghan Mujahideen fighting the Soviet occupation. A CIA case officer that I met in northern Afghanistan last autumn told me, we broke our own rules, always. Normalize a region after a conflict. Consolidate your gains. But the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989 was squandered. There followed chaos, civil war, and the Taliban came. So what we have to ask ourselves today, I think, is can it happen again? Well, the defeat of the Taliban, or rather their dispersal in November of last year, that was a major battle won. And having a guy like Hamid Karzai as an interim leader, what a stroke of good fortune. He has consistently asked for more international troops, more muscle from the UN or the US, and the answer's always been no. Just you saw in the newspapers today, the British are getting out this summer. Now, he's been confirmed as head of state in Afghanistan at the Loya Jirga over the past week. And he's now trying to do the impossible and balance all the various regional, ethnic, and warlord interests in his government. But he's a smart guy. He's learning the game. What's the first thing he said after he was confirmed as president for this next 18 months term running up to the first elections in Afghanistan? He said, help us, international community, rebuild our roadways. Now that's good. That's labor intensive. There's going to be some income there and jobs for a lot of Afghans. But what he's got in mind is this. There'll be no paving until those transport corridors and provincial capitals are secure. And that can't happen without outside military muscle to help. In effect, Hamid Karzai is challenging us. So, you went to war to defeat terror? Well, now help the people of Afghanistan finish the job. 1 million refugees have already gone back, but they've done so as an act of faith, an act of trust on us, that we're going to follow through with all of our grand promises. So everything's changing, right? The White House says, with its other mantra, there must be an end to warlordism in Afghanistan. Well, why then? Immediately after the Taliban took to the hills, did the CIA start to bankroll warlords that it thinks are currently, at least for the time being, supportive of the new interim government and the West? One congressional aide I know in Washington said, well, if you don't put your own troops on the ground, you got to rent someone else's. Just because it blew up in our face once before doesn't mean we won't try it again. And he's right, because the CIA seems to be hooked on blowback. Recently, they accused a warlord by the name of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar of plotting a coup against the interim government in Kabul. But wait a second. Hekmatyar was the biggest recipient of US tax dollars during the CIA support operation against the Russians. They've also added the Americans' Jalaluddin Haqqani to the list of their most wanted terrorists. I used to travel with him. He was made by the CIA. So they've learned their lessons. In Gardez, just a few hours' drive from Ghazni, there's a guy named Pasha Zadrani, Pasha Khan Zadrani. And this warlord has set himself up against the interim government. He rocketed the city a few weeks ago, killed 30 civilians. Karzai said, "I want him taken out." No dice. Pasha Khan is one of the warlords who rents his militiamen to the U.S. military, 600 of them, as does his pro-government rival in Gardez. The U.S. military is financing both sides in Gardez. This cartwheel of corruption and black comedy continues. So, as my red light is on, and I know it's time to wrap up, the good news is that, of course, there's a solution. I haven't been talking about the American people here. I've lived and worked with them all my life. They want to do the right and effective thing around the world. It just doesn't always filter up to their leaders, especially not in foreign policy. The Bush administration says the September 11th attacks awoke a sleeping giant. Well, sure, but what we need now is genius, not giantism. And until we, in the other countries of the so-called civilized world, step forward and accept our responsibility and our share of control of this operation, well, just remember our diver in distress. We could, all of us, drown just because we forgot to stop and breathe and think before we act. Anyway, thanks very much, and good luck.